Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining. Welcome to another of the Nature Towns and Cities Taster webinars. This one is on unlocking funding and finance for urban green spaces. I'm Matilda. I'm a project manager for the Nature Towns and Cities programme. It's lovely to be with you again today. I'm going to speak for the first few minutes just to outline what you can expect from this session and share a little bit more information about the programme. So next slide, please. So as you know, this session is focused on green finance, and the session will mostly focus on several great examples of working on this agenda. We'll start with an introduction to the topic and then have two fantastic speakers. Each case study will share their learnings and experience, and particularly what the benefits of their approach might be, followed by a panel Q&A. Next slide, please. So before we get too far in, here's a few helpful bullet points of housekeeping about how this session will work. So firstly, if you've got a question to submit to the panel about green finance, please use the Zoom Q&A feature throughout the presentations today. You can find that at the bottom of your screen now. We've enabled automatic captioning for the day, so if you want to turn these on or off, you can do so in the settings at the bottom of your screen as well. If you do need any help with your tech, you can message us via the chat and we can try and help. And just so you know, the session is being recorded and will be emailed to you directly and available via our website in the coming days. Next slide, please. So for anyone who hasn't been in one of our previous sort of taster webinars, before we dive into the topic of green finance, I also wanted to say a little bit more about the Nature Towns and Cities programme and how this all fits together. And if it helps to know, in October, we hosted an introductory webinar to the programme, which has got some more information, so you can watch that back now via our website. So the Nature Towns and Cities programme is a wider programme which aims to work with at least 100 towns and cities across the UK to transform access to green space. The programme has people at the heart of it, and the overall goal is about millions more people enjoying time outdoors in their local urban place. The programme includes a grant scheme, an accreditation process, and an inclusive network. The grant will support many towns and cities with much needed capacity to do this work. The accreditation process will provide the assurance and confidence that places are on the journey to achieving their goals in this area. And the network will provide the inspiration, support, connection, and capability for people to take action everywhere. This programme was founded by the National Lottery Heritage Fund, Natural England, and the National Trust, and we're working closely with Nature Scot, Natural Resources Wales, and the Northern Ireland Environment Agency, and we hope lots more partners in the future. Next slide, please. So this webinar is part of a series of taster sessions which give a flavour of what's to come from the network component of Nature Towns and Cities specifically. The network is designed to build confidence, capability, and connection, and ultimately to support those working on improving access to green space. It's open to everyone, and it's free to be a member. Through the network, you'll gain access to knowledge and successful solutions about what's working when it comes to green spaces. It will be a place to connect with other people who are leading for change from a range of fields relevant to towns and cities, including working with communities, working on green infrastructure, and thinking about green finance. There'll be opportunities to collaborate with each other and to build new partnerships. It's a space to tap into the collective wisdom of peers and experts from the sector and beyond. You'll be able to take part in and lead events, join cohort learning activities, and access resources. The network will be shaped by all of us, and in collaboration with you, it will grow and iterate and evolve to best serve those working on urban green spaces. It's an opportunity to be part of something bigger, and ultimately the network will help the programme create a movement for change. So please do sign up to our mailing list now and visit the website to keep up to date with the programme and see a little bit more about how you can be involved. So that's everything from me today. I'm going to hand to our chair for today, who is Andrew Burford, Principal Advisor of Green Finance and Investment at Natural England. Thank you.
Thank you, Matilda, and great to be presenting to you all and hosting the panel. Next slide, please. I want to kick off with some statistics that were presented at the EFRA Select Committee on Urban Greening in Parliament earlier on this year. 1939, median size of a neighbourhood's nearest park was around 61,500 square metres, and that figure has declined post-2000 by 40%. Next slide, please. Estimated that the proportion of England's urban areas made up green space declined from 63% in 2001 to 55% in 2018. That's from the Committee on Climate Change 2019. Next slide, please. The majority of the 2.7 million properties currently at risk of flooding are in urban areas. Startling statistic there. That's from the Chief Scientist Group of the Environment Agency 2021. Next slide, please. 2 out of 3 people don't have access to even a small area of amenity green space within 200 metres at home, and that's one of our own statistics. Next slide, please. Extensive empirical evidence of the association between exposure to nature and physical health. Next slide, please. And finally, mental ill health is the single largest cause of disability in the UK, contributing up to 22.8% of the total burden, and that is from the Department of Health. So I don't want to depress everybody on a Thursday afternoon, but I did want to point out that there's some really significant issues that we have with urban green space. Next slide, please. But there is some hope. The legislative mechanisms in the 2021 Environment Act do offer us new ways to increase both the quantity and the quality of urban green space. And so in this session, what we wanted to pull out is a couple of really great ways that we all can do that. And hopefully that's the message of hope that we can reverse these trends and we can make the UK a better place. Next slide, please. So the first opportunity we want to talk about is how do we actually implement green finance solutions? You know, there are a variety of solutions. Clearly, earlier this year, BNG came into legal force, and the framework had been in place for a number of years. And so we've got some mechanisms that we can use right now. We can start to turn cost centres, green space cost centres, into profit centres. Next slide, please. So one of the green finance solutions, which is very promising, is habitat banking, and some of the resources that Matilda was talking about that will be delivered early next year will include a habitat banking toolkit. So how do you maximise the benefits of BNG? How do you create a profit centre? And we'll have educational material, how-to resources, and a learning hub on how to do that. We'll also, in the fullness of time, introduce further solutions to the network and the hub around trees, retrofit, floods, health, and also social. Next slide, please. So the second opportunity is new product innovation. Green finance is a rapidly accelerating and growing field, and there are new things coming along all the time, which are really very exciting and much needed. Next slide, please. So, for example, a climate bundle can be created. Could be a token that is based on interventions to sequester carbon, alleviate urban heat island effects, reduce flooding. And a climate bundle can then be made up of tree canopy, tree-based sustainable urban drainage, general tree planting. So this is a much easier way for corporates to engage with urban greening. And why corporates? Well, in an urban landscape, they typically have lower BNG yields compared to rural landscapes. Higher land values means less scale, and the lower ecological value means less yield. But on the positive side, urban landscapes do have higher concentrations of people compared to rural landscapes, and they offer more ecosystem services to people, things like air quality benefits, well-being, mental health benefits, flood prevention benefits, and then there's social and activity benefits. And not only that, urban landscapes also have higher concentrations of business. So there's opportunities to create partnerships with business and to create opportunities for new ecosystems. And so part of the research that we have come up with is that actually some of these innovative new ideas appeal to corporates in an urban environment. And so there's another source of revenue and income that can be extracted from the corporate and the philanthropy environment in an urban environment. So that's the climate bundle. Next slide, please. You can imagine also a well-being bundle, token based on interventions that give well-being benefits. So stress reduction, cognitive performance, mental health, physical health. Next slide, please. So one of the things we're doing in Nature Towns and Cities is looking at what are those innovative new models and mechanisms? How can we port established finance mechanisms to the urban environment? How can we create an ecosystem of urban greening advocates? So in other words, you folks, we want you to be innovators as well and help reverse these trends. We're looking very closely at urban greening codes that are complementary with the newly arrived BSI nature standards. And we're looking at how can we create these bundles in order to attract other income streams. Next slide, please. So there's two opportunities, and I think the two speakers that I'd like to introduce you today have a great story to tell on both those opportunities. So first of all, I'm going to introduce Chris Avent from Plymouth City Council. Plymouth has done some fantastic work on habitat banking, and Chris has kindly agreed to talk about their journey, and we hope this will be really interesting to you. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Thanks for the introduction, and yeah, really pleased to be here today to give a bit of an insight into some of the work that we're doing, or as much of an insight as we can in the next 20 minutes. So yeah, hi there, I'm Chris Avent. I'm the Green Estate Manager in environmental planning at Plymouth City Council. And yeah, I'm just going to kind of talk today a little bit about the journey that we've been on in integrating urban natural spaces into the fabric of what we're trying to achieve as a city, with a focus on work towards new finance initiatives to enable this, and as Andrew mentioned, particularly habitat banking as a starter. So also want to talk a little bit about how we're ensuring we maximise the diversity and the impact of our approach. So how we're sort of sense checking that. How we're making the change, so talking about that concept of transformative change, innovation and collaboration, and then particularly sharing with you what we've learned so far about the things that are needed to make this happen, and not just the physical changes or the funding, the money particularly, but also the kind of in the background, the work with stakeholders, with people, and the partnerships we've worked to evolve this work. And particularly just to make the point is about how we've had the commitment that has been required to work through this, and the bravery and kind of bringing people along with us on the journey, but the fact that it is worth it, and it really can make some tangible difference. And then I feel at the end I'll just kind of focus on a little bit about what's next, and kind of how some of our learning can hopefully help others along the way to have an impact as well. Next slide, please. So these are the sort of broadly the sort of 6 things I'm just going to talk through as I talk about our work. So starting broadly, looking at kind of across the piece, thinking about our systems leadership approach that we've taken towards this work, and then focusing on some specific areas of work, as I said, around habitat banking, and then looking at the end around some next steps. Next slide, please. So just a bit of a spoiler. I've jumped to the end here just to give everyone a bit of an insight into kind of at this stage the solution that we've come up with to our challenge of having a suitable range of tools to deliver the sustained impact that we aspire to. So Ocean City Nature is the green finance vehicle that we've established, is at arm's length to the council, and you can see on the screen there the vision, the mission, and the broad aims of that company that we've set up. Now, it's not an absolute, and certainly, we're very much at the beginning of delivering that mission. But importantly, we've reached that important point. So this is a living, breathing entity. It's acting. It's raised investment, and we're delivering work on the ground to improve the green spaces in the city. So I hope it acts as a point of learning and inspiration for everyone else to start a journey for your places and your and the communities that you work with. Next slide, please. So just a little bit of scene setting. Our focus in Plymouth is around place-based delivery. So therefore, integration of nature-based solutions is an agenda that's essential. It can't sit outside of our city vision or other priorities. Otherwise, we know that change that we might try to make will be short-lived and unsustainable. So everything we're doing, as you can see on the screen there, that those whole range of challenges in all those different areas, which we're trying to link together to kind of have a systems approach to how we deliver this. So we know that there are multiple benefits to our urban natural spaces in Plymouth. Our natural capital accounts show that the city which we produced in 2021, showed that the city's parks and green spaces provide £186 million per year in benefits to the city across a range of functions, which are measurable and kind of equitable kind of to other economic comparisons. But particularly the social value of the areas through the health and wellbeing benefits that they generate. And that goes back to some of the points that Andrew's making around some of these significant challenges that we're facing across society. So integrating and delivering with a joined up approach is really key to the work we're doing, and to making sure that the focus isn't just on what we're doing, but how we're doing it. Next slide, please. So to achieve this, as I said, we need to kind of take a systems leadership approach, and a key aspect of this is making the most of our assets to play to our strengths. So in Plymouth, one of our key strengths is our natural environment. Our urban blue and green spaces, they're kind of a huge part of the city, and it allows us to sort of turn the dials on some of those challenges. So you can see on the screen there, that's a map of our emerging local nature recovery net, which has come from our sort of previously adopted biodiversity network. So in terms of the growth of the city, the sustainability of the city, kind of we've really embedded our natural infrastructure kind of as part of the making of the city, the growth of the city. Setting that out is a really important part of how we've been able to start this journey. And the journey one now is to maximise the benefits that those places can deliver in new ways, with new relationships and new funding models. And as Andrew mentioned, the Environment Act introduced some really strong areas and some really strong hooks for us to work with, particularly around biodiversity net gain. Something just to say, in Plymouth, we had in local policy since 2019. So in terms of our ability to work with that, we had a bit of a head start, which is really, really useful for us along as we kind of we talk through in a few more slides. Next slide, please. So our work as part of the Future Parks programme, which was the oldest sibling to Nature Towns and Cities, began in 2019 along with a number of other councils. And our ambition was to explore how we can bring forward transformative change to enable us to more effectively achieve and sustain high quality parks and open spaces. We took a systems leadership approach to this with some key work streams, and you can see some of those on the slide there. Some of them we identified from the outset. Some emerged through our early work and our co-design work with partners, all coming from work of others in the cohort. There was a really good sharing within that programme, which was valuable learning for everybody involved. And when we worked down through it, we knew finance was a key work stream from the very beginning, and we really wanted to understand how we were able, in the context of local authority budgets, how we evolve and sustain this work. So, in terms of a starting point that we were at a few years ago, we were very much in a place where we were very reliant on, our funding models around being creative with grants, with Section 106 and core revenue funds to maximise the impact, to enhance and improve and sustain and maintain our green spaces. So we wanted to take the next step. So this was very much kind of where our starting point. Next slide, please. So I'm just going to take you now on a fly through some of the key aspects of our work on sustainable finance. It starts with a vision. So everything starts with a collective and meaningful vision. So one thing I would just say to everybody is, don't be afraid to bring stakeholders together through partnership working to set out a vision and a shared strategy or an approach. It can be iterative. You're not necessarily going to get that from the beginning. And it doesn't need to be kind of linked into an absolute kind of strategic plan, but you need to have just that consensus and that we're working with a collective approach to this. So the vision you see on the screen here was one we started out with our work with National Trust and Plymouth City Council, and it gave a focus, a strong focus, and a mandate for our work. It led us towards kind of the Ocean City nature concept, which I showed you in earlier slides, and it's also now evolving into our refreshed local strategy for green spaces. And importantly, I think if you look at that, it's not just about the investment itself, it's about the impact that investment can have across the city to meet the wider objectives of the city plan. Next slide, please. So how do we started off in terms of our work on finance was looking as an opportunity assessment. So looking at how can we strategically coordinate all of the different opportunities that we saw across the city. So we worked really closely as part of the Future Parks programme and our NERF Natural Environment Investment Readiness Fund programme with Finance Earth to explore what those opportunities look like. And you can see the map there, which is kind of a really kind of like high level indicative view of the work, of a sort of summary, I suppose, of the work which we started out with. And it highlighted both opportunities for nature-based intervention and also key areas of need of investment to mitigate and adapt broadly to the climate crisis, to looking at kind of nature-based solutions across the board. So through that work and that partnership, we identified a number of different natural capital-based opportunities. So high level, kind of enabled. We required a bit of data to kind of unpick this, but it gave us an opportunity to present this in the first instance to some of our kind of key decision makers and bring them along with the journey. Next slide, please. We should be able to see on the next one a little bit of what that looked like in terms of those opportunities. So we can see here. There's a wide range of opportunities apparent for the short and the medium term. On the left-hand side there, you can see all the different kind of bundles which we were thinking about at this stage a few years ago. And across the top, you can see the specific criteria which we mapped these against to assess their feasibility and their impact. That was a really important area of the work because it gave us kind of an insight into where we need to kind of focus our effort to bring something to life, to think about how can we knit this together and how can we focus in on actually achieving something in the first instance. So the first thing that enables us to do was to bring forward the concept of Ocean City Nature. How can we deliver this portfolio or these potential portfolio of investment opportunities in one place, in one strategic place. Next slide, please. So this is where the concept of Ocean City Nature was born. So at the time of the opportunity assessment, this was named the Ocean City Fund. So before we kind of branded ourselves as Ocean City Nature, and as you can see, it sits at the head of a governance structure as the main kind of like brain, overarching strategic vehicle. It is able to accept funding from donors, but importantly, beneath it, you can hang investment vehicles, so different funds which are able to be invested in from any place. So whether that's internal investment from the council or from external investors, for example, pension funds or others, creating investment vehicles based around some of those opportunities we saw on the previous slide enables us to in a really clean and clear way, bring in investment, deliver activity and impact, and generate a kind of flow of finance, flow of cash, which can repay investors and also act as a sustainable business, delivering aspects of nature-based solutions across the city. So that's the concept that we started with. And I think one of the real benefits to this that we saw were around the ability to bundle together these things, as Andrew talked about, some of the opportunities we've got emerging around different bundles of investment. We can put those in as separate sub-funds underneath that, and within that we can create partnerships, we can create stakeholder groups who can all play into that in a really neatly governed way, but with the kind of the overarching governance vehicle kind of sitting across that, kind of giving some strategic direction and another layer of governance to sort of ensure that that's all feeding through and it's being delivered with integrity. Next slide, please. So the Habitat Bank. So I'm going to delve into a bit more detail about the Habitat Bank itself. So that sits as a particular sub-fund underneath the structure that we just saw on the previous slide. So we've created a Habitat Bank called Ocean City Biodiversity beneath Ocean City Nature. And I think, why do we choose to lead with the Habitat Bank? Clearly, we've been doing a lot of work with biodiversity net gain. We were it was very familiar to us. It was familiar to our planners. It was familiar in a local context of a real thing. We were already working with a good starting place. We'd already delivered a BNG project as well, so we understood some of the costs and some of the detail behind it. But also we could see forward and see the opportunities that it gave to providing some to the solutions to some of the issues which we have, particularly around finance. It was a real life opportunity to bring forward something which could be a sustainable business in effect. So taking some particular sites in the city, green spaces which are currently kind of acted as liabilities or draws on our finances, into self-sustaining income-generating assets over the long term, and providing benefits to the communities that live close to those places to access a high-quality nature site. Demand was also there, and we also understood a lot about the mechanics of how that may work. We also didn't want to see the flight of biodiversity from the city. So the risk with biodiversity net gain is that we're going to have developers buying biodiversity units from other places, and then that mitigation being lost to other parts of the country. Right, next slide, please. So I'm just aware of the time, so I'm going to whiz through these next few bits in a bit quickly. So the habitat banking model. So importantly, the important point here is how this works. It's pretty straightforward. We raise investment. That investment comes into the Habitat Bank. We use that money to improve the habitat sites, which generates biodiversity units. The developer then purchases the biodiversity units from the Habitat Bank. The money flows back into the Habitat Bank. Part of that money is used to repay the investment over time. I think the important thing to flag here is, that kind of upfront investment angle is a really important aspect of this, where we're not relying and waiting on developers to come to us, as you would traditionally have done for Section 106 agreement to offset biodiversity impact. We're enhancing habitats in advance of impact, which one gives us a better return in terms of the way that the biodiversity net gain metric works, but also kind of puts us in a really good position. To have that those high quality habitats invested in. And we did a lot of work around modelling risk around this, and we've obviously kind of landed our habitat bank in a way which we feel is appropriate for the scale of investment and the level of risk which is involved there. Next slide, please. So another piece of the jigsaw puzzle when we were building our business case and investment case for the habitat bank was setting some principles. Really important that we set these out so we could always cross-reference back to them to check in to ensure that what we were aiming to achieve in terms of those broad social, environmental, and economic benefits were being realised. Now we weren't drifting off into a kind of an unexpected avenue. So setting out some principles is a really important part of this work. Next slide, please. So just as a quick, I'm just going to go into a few of the sort of specifics, I suppose, to kind of show how some of the reality of creating kind of a habitat bank in the way that we've done, and this isn't the only way that you can do it, I will say, and what that looks like, just to bring it to life for you. So Plymouth City Council has set up an arm's length company limited by guarantee, Ocean City Nature, and that's the holding company for currently the only sub-fund or investment we have underneath that is our habitat bank, Ocean City Biodiversity. That is a company limited by shares, which is wholly owned by Ocean City Nature. We've raised £500,000 worth of investment into that habitat bank, and that investment has come from Plymouth City Council itself through a commercial loan from the Public Works Loan Board, repayable over 10 years. But in time, we've got the ability for Ocean City Nature, as I said, to create additional subsidiaries, additional kind of investment models which can run through, raise investment and deliver activity. Next slide, please. So just a bit of an overview of what it took for us to kind of achieve this place. Given I think we were the first local authority kind of setting something up in this way. We've taken 3 executive decisions to get this through. The first one looked at an options assessment, recommending the arm's length vehicle approach to act as a habitat bank. Plymouth is a unitary authority, so we were kind of in maybe a different position to other authorities who may be kind of listening in today. But that was our kind of like focus, and that was our recommended option, which was approved. We then had to take back some details around the company structure and the governance arrangements, and then finally we took forward the final business case, which was asking for the £500,000 worth of investment. So I think we took it slowly but surely, because as we were breaking new ground with this probably could be bundled and done more quickly and with less decision points than we had. But we had to kind of like work through this slowly, but to bring people along with us. And I'll come on to a little bit around stakeholders in a moment and that journey. Next slide, please. Okay, there's loads of info on this slide, just to give some kind of context of what we're working with. I won't dwell on it too much, but just, actual slides will be shared off following this, and you can look at this in more detail. But broadly, just to give some sense that these are based in reality in terms of the work that we did. I think importantly, the supply and demand assessment we did was a really important part of building our business case. So on the supply side, assessing our sites, we assessed 29 sites initially with the biodiversity net gain metric. And then we also looked at demand from our kind of development pipeline, our local plan. So just to really make sure that the investment case we proposed was strong, and we were going to make sure we were going to be able to sell the units we generated. Why was it important? Really important because it kind of brought people along with us. We were talking in real terms, and kind of made people understand, particularly in our finance teams, that what we were talking about was real, and it had kind of good credibility behind it. Next slide, please. So just a summary of the business model. Here again, quite a lot of detail here. As I said, we raised £500,000 worth of investment. We did benefit from having some of our development costs covered through our work on the Future Parks programme and other grants which we'd received to kind of develop this work. But that can be bundled together, if you're looking at a business case without that kind of input. And then just to show, based on some modelled numbers in terms of biodiversity, we're looking at around £500,000 worth of investment effectively generates £7.4 million worth of revenue over the full 30-year period of the Habitat Bank. So, significant sums of money. And this is for 3 sites, 109 hectares, 3 publicly accessible nature reserve sites in the city. Next slide, please. So stakeholders, this is again quite a detailed slide, which if you get a chance to look at this following this webinar, it just illustrates the broad range of people that we had to bring along on the journey with us to achieve this. So there's a lot of people to engage, but I think one thing I will say that we learned is that everybody we worked with was once they understood the concept of what we were doing, was fully supportive and fully behind the realization of this work. So yeah, a huge amount of credit to kind of all the kind of stakeholders who kind of supported us on this internally, as well as external stakeholders as well, obviously. But yeah, a lot of different aspects to bringing this forward from a whole range of areas, as you can see there. Next slide, please. So just to say, it's not, this isn't about what we've achieved, it's about how we've done it. To go back to the point made at the start, bringing together partnerships on this and the delivery of this through our workforce, through community groups we've been working with, in terms of not just the finance work, more broadly, and our work is, absolutely key to people understanding and believing in what we're doing, particularly when you're talking about sort of something around finance. Yeah, you need to kind of bring it to life for people and make sure they're kind of coming with that, and they see the impact and the benefits that are coming from that work, and it's not something done in isolation. It's really, really important. Okay, next slide, please. Just the last couple of slides now, just to sort of share a few key learning points, and then sort of just on the next steps. So 3 areas here. I think some of the key things we've learnt in the last few years working on this is not to underestimate the sort of the journey around this, particularly the mindset shift that comes from this when you first start out talking to people about basically turning our natural infrastructure assets into assets as opposed to liabilities. So moving them into the sort of positive side of the opportunity to derive revenue from these assets. People kind of really struggle to understand that idea. It's quite new in many ways. So yeah, turning that mindset around it takes some time and effort, and kind of bring that forward. Stakeholder engagement, yeah, having that support of a project sponsor at the beginning, bringing all those people along on the diagram I showed you before, that's really, really important, and bringing people along at the earliest possible stage. And then building integrity in common purpose, going back to the principles that we set out, I showed you, that's a really important point to ensure that you're always referring back to those. But to say, local authorities are pretty tuned into that. That idea of place-based priorities, and taking this work forward, we're in a really strong position to be able to do that with the whole range of colleagues that we work with on a regular basis. And then finally, next slide, please. Final slide. Just what's next. So just a very quick overview. From a habitat point of view, we'll just be looking to next year to make our first sales. We're currently having discussions with developers. Work is underway on the ground on our first site, and next year ideally all 3 sites. And people understand what we're doing is we're promoting it widely. They understand the benefits, as I said. Ocean City Nature, we're working on a whole range of different investment propositions in the background around carbon, related to woodland, related to the marine environment, looking at water and suds, and in that frame that Andrew was talking about, some of those other bundles. I'll stop there. I've just gone just over time, but hopefully that's been useful for you. It was a very quick whiz through. We did do a webinar series earlier in the year, so the link is on the screen there. I think it's in the chat. So if you want to delve a bit more detail, and it takes us another couple of hours for the other webinars, then it will, you'll be able to delve into a bit more detail around that work around habitat banking if you wish to. But thank you everybody, and I'll hand back to you, Andrew.
Great, thank you, Chris. That was really inspiring. I'm sure there will be many people in the audience today that will get real value out of seeing your journey and looking into some of the resources that have been created from your journey. So yeah, big thank you. I particularly liked actually a few points. I mean, the strategically coordinated opportunities or project pipeline, as I like to call it, I think is a really important part of really understanding what you've got, and you can't put together a finance strategy until you've really mapped out what you've got and what you can do with it. So I think you doing that early in the project was really valuable. I think the information on the governance was great, and the different vehicles. And then finally, people and communities. I mean, you really have to do it with and through the people and communities, and I think you've done a fantastic job there. So moving on, I talked about 2 opportunities using existing green finance solutions, but then there's also innovative new models. I'm delighted to welcome Sara Eppel from Nature and People, and Sara has come up with a fantastic Urban Biodiversity Standard. So I'll leave you with Sara, and over to you.
Thank you, Andrew. Thanks for the introduction. So I'm Sara Eppel from the Nature and People Foundation. My background is in government. I was in DEFRA as a senior civil servant for a few years, and I've been doing private consultancy since 2016 when I left. We do a lot on biodiversity, nature, and this project is on urban. And the 2 pictures you see in front of you are Rio de Janeiro and Nairobi. And that's because we're doing pilot projects there. Next slide, please. Thank you. So I'll just give you a quick overview here, who we are, what the Urban Biodiversity Standard is, the science that underpins it, and how it can meet solutions for cities' challenges. I'll talk about our pilot projects, and also probably the most important thing, how do you generate high integrity urban biodiversity credits, which can be the solution for some local authorities for financing future green infrastructure. Next slide, please. So the Nature and People Foundation is a young organisation. We've only been around for a year or more, little more. As Andrew described earlier, it's about bringing people and nature together. So how can people in densely populated spaces like cities or towns actually benefit from nature? Next slide, please. Cities are on the front line of climate change, as many of you will know, with all the floods and so on that we've been having here. Cities are highly exposed to natural hazards, as Andrew said. Population health is adversely affected by air pollution in the atmosphere from traffic and industrial emissions. So actually that should be much more than 4.2 million, it should be 4.2 billion. Climate risk, as you know, high hazards, natural disasters, they hit hard in urban areas. The economic risk from nature loss and climate change, well, the World Economic Forum reckoned it was about 44% of global GDP. I would argue it's nearer to 100%, because when you look further down the chain, nature and climate together impact the way we live. Thermal increases, so the heat we're experiencing in some parts of the world are dramatically increasing with climate change. I've just come from South America, where they are experiencing +3 to 5 degrees in heat waves in the city. And these heat waves are lasting 3 weeks to a month, if not longer, in some places. So that is a really critical issue just for livability. Next slide, please. The benefits of urban biodiversity, I'm hoping many of you on the call will be very much aware of this. It can improve air quality, it promotes thermal comfort, reduces the heat island effect, it absorbs and diffuses noise, regulates flooding and runoff, reduces erosion. It can does improve the resilience of city ecosystems. It can regulate the populations of harmful pests, such as mosquitoes with dengue fever, which is what we're working with in South America. It can mitigate climate change with growing trees and storing carbon. And it reduces stress and promotes physical and mental health, as Andrew mentioned. Next slide, please. So the underpinning science of our Urban Biodiversity Standard has come out of 25 years of work in the University of Seville, where in effect, what they've done is a very large scale study over that period of European trees, and they've examined their capacities to absorb different pollutants, to provide shade and thermal comfort, transpiration, to reduce flooding, to be tolerant to drought. So that we now have a pretty comprehensive database for European trees. Beyond that, beyond Europe, in the Americas, in Africa, in Asia, we have to do some very basic science to build our understanding of the types of trees and what they're doing. Next slide, please. So this is an example of what we're doing in Rio de Janeiro. The focus there of our pilot project is on tackling excess heat. And if you look at these two maps, the one on the right, which has got areas of blue, the areas of blue are the forest. The areas of red, and the hottest areas of red, are in the north of the city. And these are very intensely populated areas with very, very few trees, very few neighborhood parks. And the left-hand map is slightly wider as a map, which is why it looks slightly different. But what they've examined there is during heat waves, how many people are hospitalized. And you can see from that in the west end of the city, it's having an extreme effect. They're also the most deprived, socially and economically deprived areas. And they're really suffering from the heat, and it's having a very serious effect on the people who live there. Next slide, please. This map shows you where the existing green spaces and blue spaces. So obviously, if you know Rio de Janeiro, along the coast, that's basically the beach. But most of the green spaces, the parks, are along the south and on the east side. One of the parks in the north is one of our new parks, and the one on its own in the middle of nothing on the western side of the city is a new park which we are working on at the moment. So you can see there's a huge amount of space where neighborhood parks need to be put in, really, which is quite tricky because you have to have space for that. And some of these are favelas, they're very overpopulated and houses built on houses. The forested areas look very accessible, but in practice they're not, because it's not easy to get into them. You need to drive to get to an entry point, and then it tends to be wealthier people who can do that and go for a run or a walk at the weekends. So it's not a neighborhood accessible area. You can't just go there after school with your kids. But the Prefettura, the City Council, has an ambition for 25 new parks. So hopefully it's going to be an ongoing development throughout the city. Next slide, please. We're also doing a project in Formentera, which is a small island off the coast of Spain. This has, to some extent, a heat focus, very, very different because it's rural. But the towns really do suffer quite intensively from heat because they're really very under vegetated. They don't have enough trees to provide shade. And in the rural areas, the quality of the soil is so poor. It has been over fertilized. They've got a huge amount of runoff. The soil quality is very, very weak. And so actually it's intensifying the heat in the area, and there's a lot more of the forests are suffering very badly. So that's a very different approach, but the result will be a reforestation effect. Next slide, please. Nairobi City County, where we're hopefully starting a project next year, their priorities are flood prevention. They had huge floods earlier this year, as you can see from the picture from Reuters, and they also have big problems with air pollution from traffic in certain areas. Theirs is a more holistic approach. They really want to cover all of these different issues, plus dealing with drought and, in different parts of the city. So that's going to be a very holistic approach. Next slide, please. The scientific analysis that we do on trees is a combination of field and laboratory research. 30 individual trees are measured, and that's height, crown width, diameter at breast height, leaf area, how much light is excluded. The leaves are scanned to look at the surface and how much absorption of pollution they're likely to be able to do. We test thermal tolerance and thermal comfort, and that's done in the field. We've got testing starting in Rio de Janeiro imminently. We look at water use efficiency, so how well does the tree absorb water and retain water, how much can it deal with drought, and we test that up to 40 degrees centigrade. And then the pollution capture is done in a controlled chamber where emissions from a diesel engine are pumped in, and we see how the saplings cope. So basically that's how you build up the model. And the annual CO2 absorption for carbon is also in the controlled chamber. Next slide, please. So this is just to give you an example of two familiar trees and how differently they can perform. So the London plane tree, very common here in London. If you look, it's doing a good job. It's doing a great job, actually. And it's particularly doing a fantastic job with PM10 absorption. Diesel emissions. But if you compare it to the jacaranda, which is not a common tree here because it's not a native tree, but it's actually from native to South America, the coastal Atlantic rainforest. So quite likely will be a tree that we will be recommending goes into the new parks there. But actually looking at how much CO2 that stores compared to the London plane, it's about twice as much. The leaf area and the biomass from that tree is equally almost twice as much. And that means you get more shade from it, you get more transpiration, it reduces the heat under the tree and around the tree. And the NO2 absorption of the jacaranda, which is an emission from traffic, is also 3 times as good as the way the London plane absorbs NO2. So you can see understanding the ecosystem strengths of a tree can give you very different results, and therefore you can plant different mixes of trees in different areas. Next slide, please. This is just the list of the tree species we're testing this month in Rio de Janeiro. Not expecting you to read that in any great detail, although if you're an ecologist, you might want to. Basically, they are all indigenous except for 2 of them. And the reason we're testing those 2 is because they're already in the parks. And therefore, we need to know how much they're contributing to the ecosystem services we're looking at. And it gives you an idea of the degree of variation between how much they keep UV, ultraviolet light out, and how much they raise humidity and so on. Next slide, please. So how do these urban biodiversity standards actually work? So to do a credits project, we first of all engage with stakeholders, starting with the council. We need the council, if it's their land, so it needs to be a landowner. It can be a council, it could be a developer. It doesn't have to be a council, but I'm just giving you an example of a council. We engage heavily with the council and find out what their needs are. What does the city need? And the 2 examples I've given you of Rio and Nairobi give you some feel for that. Then we do baseline mapping and measuring of the existing tree and shrub species stock. So that will be from inventories, It will also be from satellite. So we use both those to, check that we've got the full range of the stock. We then do the tree testing, which I just described, and then select the best trees for the site that we're going to be working in. Now, this could be a park. It can be a neighbourhood park. It can be a large park. So the park in the west of the city in Rio is about 25 hectares. The neighbourhood park in the north of the city is 2 hectares. So it's and we can also work along streets. In fact, ideally, you would work out from the park once you've done your little parklet, go out from that into the streets, plant up the streets, plant on roundabouts, along rivers, any corner you can, frankly. And you can also do green roofs, green walls. They can all contribute into the whole for a city. Because you need to, ideally, if you can get networks of biodiversity, then you're increasing the ecosystem resilience, you're increasing the habitats for all sorts of species, small mammals, birds, bees, bats, insects, and that's what we're trying to achieve, as well as giving the ecosystem services to people. And then we can generate credits once the planting has gone in. Next slide, please. How do we do credits? Well, annually, we measure the tree and shrub species which we've installed. So this is all additional to the baseline. And we're looking at 3 things: the diversity of the species. Are they all still alive? Are they still diverse? The abundance of the species. Is it growing as you'd expect? And the resilience of the species. Is it still there? Is it strong? In effect, the resilience is probably the one which is the most important in a way, because if it's not resilient, then it's going to die. And we measure our urban biodiversity credits in an area of 100 square meters. So it's smaller than most of the rural biodiversity net gain or voluntary rural biodiversity credits or carbon credits. Those are mostly on a hectare measurement. So the point is we do them in small areas. There can be any shape, and it's the vegetation that we've planted which is being measured. And from that, you will get one single biodiversity credit, or you can call it an ecosystem service credit if you want to. Biodiversity credits have a market. It's a very, very embryonic market at the moment. So it doesn't really matter what you call it, but if you want to market it in the biodiversity credit market, you'd need to have it as a biodiversity credit. We have monitoring and reporting verification. Those are all part of the programme. It's over 25 years if you have a project like this. So the monitoring is done annually. We can use a range of different tools, satellite, we can use local monitors if that's sensible. We can use bioacoustics for measuring pollinators, bats and birds, and camera traps for small mammals. Basically, we're creating habitats. We put all the data onto blockchain, so it's easy to validate, and we use independent third-party verifiers. In areas of real deprivation, we will be awarding social seal, which is it doesn't really have a value, but it might in the longer term, who knows? But it's basically a way of saying, this park is bringing additional ecosystem services to this area because of their deprivation and lack of green space. Next slide, please. So this is looking at the financing plan. There are various options for how you can use the credits. You can sell them. You can sell the credits to local businesses who might be interested from a kind of license to operate approach, or from a kind of environmental, social and governance reason, maybe because they want to polish their reputation. People like pension funds are quite interested in this. Impact investors are quite interested. You can create social tokens, as Andrew mentioned, and you could even have individual citizens buying tokens if that was made available. So that's the kind of straight sale. The other way to do it is the next are all sort of ways in which banks can use the approach. And this depends very much on whether your local authority is able to, for example, raise bonds, or whether you can have substitution with credits. And it will depend very much country by country. So I'm not going to go into this in a lot of detail because I don't know the detail of how English local authorities can borrow. And clearly cities have slightly different arrangements than smaller local authorities. But the slide is there, you can delve into it. Next slide, please. And this is a schematic to show you kind of what are the building blocks. So we have the Urban Biodiversity Standard as your scientific underpin. And from the standard and from the planting and doing the monitoring, you come out basically with key performance indicators. So you will have annual KPIs from the credits, and that's where it can be part of a different set of financing mechanisms. So the distribution channels could be against your debt, it could be credit sales, it could be retail sales. And the technology platform, which is the way in which this is actually delivered, is basically through a registry. The registry is being created at the moment, and that will be the way that the monitoring, reporting and verification comes through the system, if you like. It's where the analytics can be downloaded. It'll be the KPI database. It'll have all the data. And then potentially there will be payments interfaces if people want to buy credits straight from the technology platform. And there may be other banking arrangements. So those are the kind of range of options. As I say, it's early days. These are being created right now, but it's pretty exciting in terms of the potential. Next slide, please. Our pilots at the moment, we have Rio de Janeiro, which is very advanced. We've got Formentera, also very advanced. We're starting on Nairobi. There's one starting in Seville, and we're in discussions with Manaus about doing a pilot project in their city in time for COP30 next year. But we're very interested in cities who are keen to participate. We would love to talk to you. So next slide, please. Thank you. That's my contact. Those are my contact details. Please use the QR code to go online. And these are all our partners who we work with. And that's me. So I hope that gave you some food for thought, and I'm really happy to answer any questions. Handing back to you, Andrew, I think it is, or maybe it's Victoria now.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Sarah and Chris, and also Andrew for the introduction. For those of you who don't know me, my name's Victoria Bradford-Keegan. I'm the Programme Director for Nature, Towns and Cities, and also particularly interested in this subject, but for today's purpose, I'm your chair. So it'd be wonderful if I could ask our three speakers to come back onto the screen. We have had quite a number of questions come through, and I'm sure there'll be some more as we start. So it'd be brilliant if we could, we could ask our the first of our questions. We've had quite a lot that are about habitat banking and the approach taken in Plymouth. We've had a few about kind of smaller spaces and credits and things like that, and also a few around specifics around ecology and biodiversity around the Every Tree model. So we'll take a few from each of those sections, but do keep them coming in if you have got a question. Our speakers are here and primed to answer them. So I think if it's okay, we might start with one about smaller spaces that might not be appropriate for habitat banking. So we've had Sophie has asked, what about smaller spaces that might be not appropriate for some of the bigger funding? Is there a way that what we've heard about today might be might help them to secure some of the longer term sustainable funding that they're looking to secure to build on their horticultural therapy and nature recovery work that they do? A small site in London. I'm not expecting people to get into the specifics of giving advice on individual sites and things, but just generally thinking about what we've heard today and kind of the ability to work and secure funding for smaller sites in very dense urban areas. That would be wonderful if Sarah or Andrew, you have any insights on those.
Andrew.
Oh, okay. I'll go and then you can come straight in. I was just going to add a general point to that, Victoria. I think, it's quite right. BNG and that habitat banking and these statutory mechanisms, they don't work for every site. You do need to have a certain amount of land and the right ecology to get the the return from the investment of doing the works. But the good news is there are other options, and we've been trialling a site called Projects for Nature, which is to test the demand of corporates and philanthropists to put donations into nature recovery. And what we found, what we've learned, and this was a very recent evaluation, just literally a couple of weeks ago, is that they're very, very interested in location-based projects. So if you have a smaller site and it might be close by a large corporate or some businesses, you'll probably find that they'd be really interested in supporting you. So that would be where I would start. You know, if you've got a small site, you can't do BMG, see if you can do philanthropy or corporate sponsorship. But Sarah, let me go back over to you. Sorry for nudging in.
No, not at all. Thanks, Andrew. Yes, I would agree with Andrew's point there. It's interesting, Andrew, that you've found corporates keen. I think you're right. I think it's maybe I'm struggling because ours is so novel. I mean, looking at Sophie's question, you're talking here about horticultural therapy and well-being. I mean, for us to do a biodiversity credits project, an urban biodiversity credits project, we, as you can see from the presentation I've just given you, we're basing it on kind of trees and new growth and adding in new things. If you've got a really small site where basically you're doing all your horticulture there, it's going to be quite difficult for you to expand and to generate these credits. I mean, theoretically, if you have extra space and you wanted to do it, you can, because 100 meters squared is a pretty small space. Maybe working with your local authority, perhaps you could link up to something they're doing. I don't know. Yeah, so it would work in terms of space, but it may not work in terms of how you're using the space right now, is I think what I would say. And I think Andrew's advice is probably the best.
Great, thank you both. Going to the other end of the spectrum, I've had a question about how much land you do actually need for a BNG unit. I'd like to expand that question slightly and send it your way, Chris, if that's okay. But so how much land have you put into the habitat bank, and what sort of considerations did you take into account when thinking about the size and the type of the 3 sites that you have put in that you told us about?
Yeah, thanks, Victoria. No, that's a really good question. And yeah, I didn't obviously delve into too much of that detail in my talk earlier, but yeah, we've brought forward 3 sites, and in total they cover 109 hectares. And I think so that gives us about, if everything works in terms of our habitat interventions as planned, we'll derive around 280 biodiversity units. So I think that tends to be the kind of, certainly in an urban setting, the sort of a broad average, sort of for between 2 to 3 biodiversity units per hectare in terms of your uplift opportunity on most sites, but that's not everywhere. Obviously, that was a material factor when we were considering which sites to choose in terms of what availability of biodiversity units there would be, because that plays into the whole business model, the supply and demand. We had a range of different criteria we used when we were assessing all those sort of 29 sites we initially looked at. So one of them was obviously the biodiversity unit value and the habitat type, obviously the distinctiveness of the habitat, so matching up supply and demand from that perspective. But also in terms of location, you know, kind of thinking from an equity perspective, you know, we couldn't do everywhere. We'd love to have done everywhere in the first go, but we had to choose, you know, some sites so that it matched up with the kind of levels of investment we thought were viable. But yeah, we tried to choose 3 sites which were sort of dispersed around the city, linked to kind of greatest area of need from sort of socioeconomic perspective as well, and linked back to our kind of assessments of accessible green space, which we have through our local plan. So there was a whole range of different factors, which if you watch back on the Habitat Bank webinars, it kind of get into a bit more detail around that. Thanks.
Great, thank you. And we've just got a couple of other people checking in on some of this things around kind of land ownership and opportunities for others in relation to habitat banking. Obviously, Chris, you're talking about your experience in Plymouth, but for somebody asking, did you already own the land? And I think linked to that, have you had any resistance
well, not linked, but if you could take the two together, have you had any resistance to the idea of kind of improving the biodiversity or rewilding, which obviously is a controversial term in some circles?
Yeah, we land on wilding in Plymouth as our kind of shared term rather than rewilding, but it tends to be a bit softer and goes down better. But I think the concept of improving habitats, no, it's broadly welcomed across the board. Everyone wants to see higher quality nature sites in the city and ability to access those. And I think I didn't make that point earlier, but in terms of what we've been able to do and build into the costings of our habitat bank is not just about the habitat improvements themselves, but also about putting money and investment into the infrastructure, the broader infrastructure of the site to enable good quality paths, fencing in the right places, both so we can enable people to access the sites without sort of detriment to the biodiversity as well, and obviously managing and monitoring that. So having rangers, feet on the ground to kind of monitor and work around that is really important. I've gone off track. I forgot what your original question was. Have I answered it?
Did you own the land?
Oh yeah, we did. But so yes, if Plymouth City Council owned land, so that's all been leased to the company. It's been leased to Ocean City Biodiversity. So to enable then that company to register the land with Natural England, we had to have a kind of ownership or kind of control of the land. So yeah, that kind of took that forward. It was important that they were publicly, public spaces, and we were putting kind of investment into those places which mattered for the city.
And
Can I add
yes,
to that?
yeah, go for it.
So a different perspective, but I think the stakeholder engagement is so important. I mean, Chris outlined how they've done it in Portsmouth, but our experience in Rio de Janeiro, actually, interestingly, the city had basically done it before we arrived, so we didn't need to worry about it. But and in Nairobi, they're really very keen on trees and green space, but they also have communities have a view on where they want things, and that needs to be respected. The project we're going to be doing in Manaus, we've already been told that actually trees have a really hard time in Manaus. People will cross a street, go to a central reservation and pull up a tree just for the hell of it. Why? Who knows? But it's a kind of cultural thing. They don't see the value of it. So the approach is going to have to be really slow and really engaging local communities so that they own it. Otherwise, it just will fail. So yeah, community engagement, I think, is super, super important.
Thank you. I've got a question around some of the work you've been doing, actually. So in the Q&A, we've had a question about whether there's any examples of, I think this applies to either of the case studies we've heard today, about working along public rights of way. You've already talked about kind of linear routes along roads, Sarah, but active travel routes or public rights of way. Do either of those feature in the two case studies we've heard from today?
I mean, not in mine, possibly because rights of way aren't really a concept in either of those local authorities. I think the key issue is land ownership or a long lease. If a landowner has given a lease for 25, 30 years and the leaseholder wants to do the project, that's fine. So long as there are legal rights for the length of the project, then it's okay. So rights of way would depend on, well, who actually owns the land and does the landowner want it? Because basically that's the person who's going to generate the credits, so they need to be the project proponent. So that's basically how it works. So yeah, not quite applicable in either of my countries at the moment.
Chris, any of your sites, linear sites?
I mean, not really in terms of when you consider the site as a whole. They're all broadly sort of broader nature reserves with a whole range of access points, but they do have access networks within them. And I think in one of those sites, one of them is officially a public right of way. I'm not sure if the question was kind of thinking about kind of how do we use this to kind of create connectivity within our kind of nature networks as well. I think that may be where it was kind of like linking as well. I think that would be a fantastic aspiration, but certainly something we've considered because we've changed our kind of our mowing regime to kind of enhance sort of meadow areas around the city. So But I think the challenge with that is the kind of control and the competing factors in those kind of spaces in terms of the constraints that you have with pressures from highways or public rights of way needing to change over time, and kind of then the liability that comes with then the impact on the net gain you may have delivered there, or the credits you've kind of like created. It's a trickier nut to crack, I think.
Great, thank you. Just turning back to your example, Sarah. I love a jacaranda tree, but somebody in the chat was wondering whether there might be more appropriate trees. You had the comparison with the London plane for the UK context. I guess, given a lot of your work is in South America and Southern Europe with a slightly hotter climate, you perhaps haven't done that work yet. But I'm just interested if you could share any thoughts on that.
The work's been done.
Okay.
Yeah, it's in the database. I haven't got immediate access to it, so I can't give you another tree that you would recognise. I'm sorry. Maybe I should have thought about that in advance of this this presentation. No, I don't have it to hand. But yes, the work's been done that covers Europe, England trees. So it wouldn't be too difficult to, run the numbers and find out which are the best trees for whichever ecosystem service is needed in whichever city. We'd also probably do a few other tests anyway, just to verify things like resilience,
Right.
and flooding and so on. But yeah, no, we have done all that.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's see where else are we going. I've got some questions around scale of. I think the questions are in relation to BNG and habitat banking, but I think they might be more broadly applicable. But if we start with BNG and habitat banking, and then Sarah and Andrew, I'll bring you in. So the question in the chat is around Plymouth's unitary, and the habitat banking model is existing at that geography. But do you, Chris, think that it could go beyond over multiple authorities, or also cover NGOs? Could other people be invited to supply land, to lease land to the habitat bank? If you could share your thoughts on that, that would be lovely.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. I mean, absolutely. So as part of that reason for setting up the structure in the way that we have done, with those sort of ability to create subsidiaries, either the habitat bank itself, as we've already created it, could lease in land from others and act as kind of a broker and have the right arrangements in place with other local authority land, and the right agreements in place in terms of then flows of revenue, or we could set up different subsidiaries around that, so stakeholder interests are kind of covered from different. There's a mix and match kind of opportunity there. Certainly, that's something which is quite it's very early, but it's certainly a thought that's kind of certainly in Devon, consider it sort of thought around that with other local authorities. We're not taking it anywhere yet, just because we're really kind of focusing on getting our own bit done and getting it properly live and operational. But it's certainly something which in the near term could be considered, and there's ability to do that with the structure that we've got, and huge efficiency and value in doing that, to be honest, because we don't need to repeat all the work that we've done. Doesn't necessarily need to be repeated throughout the whole country, and everyone needs to set up these kind of structures. There is opportunity there, which is why something like a sort of the network like the Nature Town Cities network can enable that to kind of like move forward at maybe certain like regional, sub-regional scales.
Great, thank you. And Sarah, in terms of your work, is that largely within one city, or have you seen municipalities combining to sort of share effort, create shared endeavour?
I mean, at the moment it's single cities, but they're big cities. However, in Rio, for example, Rio State, so the surrounding area, which has 13 municipalities, I think, they're looking very closely at what we come up with in terms of recommendations for the trees to be used and how they need to be planted and so on. Because once you've done the science, as long as it's in the same ecosystem, the expensive work is done, basically. And then local authorities can just do their own projects. They don't need to involve us. They can register their projects through the registry, and they can use the same recommended species and mix in others if they want to. you know, and we'd obviously have to do we have to do the baselining science, but you don't need to do the basic tree testing, which is the expensive stuff. So yeah, there's definitely interest in just picking up and running with the work that has been done in those ecosystems.
Great. So we're definitely hearing potential for economies of scale. Andrew, any thoughts on sort of whether there is an ideal geography or size or for this type
Well,
of...
it's a really interesting question. I think there's no right or wrong answer. It doesn't matter really how small or how large, but there are some great benefits in scale. So you can aggregate your sites together. And if you do go down, for example, the route of a habitat bank that Chris outlined, you can have more streamlined admin to cover all of the sites. So there's some efficiencies there. Also, private investors actually like larger projects. So if they're only having to do 1 or 2 transactions to invest across, for example, the whole of a combined authority that includes a number of local authorities, then you can actually get to the point of setting up projects faster. So I think it is worth, I certainly encourage anybody to explore that if they have the opportunity to collaborate with neighbouring local authorities and form something bigger. It's certainly worth looking at.
Great, thank you. We've got a question about kind of oh well, we're trying to think how to sum it up around kind of where did the ideas originate? Again, the person questioning is kind of framing it in the context of the Plymouth Habitat Bank, but I kind of think it'd be interesting actually, Sara, if you could share any thoughts on your experience in Nairobi or Rio as well. You know, where did it originate? What's been the key to taking that kind of the early idea and enabling it to grow, to flourish on? There's just lots of biodiversity analogies there which weren't intentional, no pun intended, but nonetheless an appropriate term. Yeah, do you want to go first, Chris, and Sara afterwards?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, so I mean, ours was born, as I said, broadly from my environmental planning kind of area of work, which I sit in. But that was really well supported kind of at director level. So feeding into kind of, we set up at the start of our Future Parks program, set up a Green Estate board, which effectively kind of included the relevant directors who needed to understand the work that we were doing to be able to feed that through and kind of like get that support at kind of a more senior corporate level. So although the idea was born from that work which we were doing from our own work, but importantly working with Finance Earth, working with Plymouth City Council on this. But yeah, having that kind of direct route up through to directors to keep them updated regular, fortnightly, just keep them in play with these things. Then that, I suppose that idea, that germ of that idea quickly spread, which is I suppose the important part.
Great, thank you, Sara.
So biodiversity credits, I mean, you'll all be familiar with carbon credits, and they've had a pretty discredited journey recently. So there's 2 things with biodiversity credits. First of all, they were always really difficult to nail. How do you compare one ecosystem, one set of biodiversity with another? You know, a farmland in Cambridge is nothing like a coral reef off Australia, is nothing like the inner city of Nairobi. So it's very difficult to compare. But that was kind of overcome, to be honest, during COVID. Scientists kind of had time to think about things instead of just running programs, and came up with some really brilliant ideas about how you could create credits. Now, there are lots of different ways of doing it, so everybody has a slightly different way, but it meant that the idea of a credits market could start and gain traction. There's also been a lot of work done internationally to create what's called high integrity credits. So ensuring there are things like third-party verification, that it's it's on blockchain generally, so it's very easy to validate and to see the standards and so on, and having regular monitoring. So there are lots of things which have been put in place to overcome some of the problems of the carbon market. So there was how our project came around, the one in Rio, came around because Mayor Pais of Rio de Janeiro was at New York Climate Week. He heard about biodiversity credits and he my husband, who is my business partner as well, works for an organisation called Nature Finance, and Nature Finance were at New York Climate Week. Mayor Pais turned to them and said, we need some of these in Rio de Janeiro. And they knew that we were developing the Urban Biodiversity Standard. And basically that was like, okay, we'll deliver it. So it was kind of an accident of contacts, if you like. Nairobi, we actually approached Nairobi because we have some good networks there, and they are very, very excited about it. Very, very different environment. So it's been a sort of accident of who you know at the beginning. We're now have been going for the last 6 months much wider. So we've got a long list of cities who are interested, but actually getting each project going requires funding. So fundraising is quite a large part of it as well.
Great, thank you. We've only got a couple of minutes left, so I'm going to try and pick what appear to be the more common questions from the chat, from the Q&A, sorry. And this first one is for you, Andrew. So beyond what we've talked about today, what do you see as perhaps some of the other mechanisms or more viable alternative approaches for green space funding, for innovation in green space funding? Are there any others that are high up on your to-do list, your hit list? Say a little bit about that.
It's a really exciting space. There's so much that can be done. And so a big part of what I'm doing in Natural England is this sort of blue sky thinking about, what are other new mechanisms that could be brought in. So, for example, we touched on some of the social benefits, the health benefits. How do you actually potentially monetize those to bring in money for projects? So it's one idea we've been toying with, which we call environmental and social net gain. And the core of that idea is that actually, there is a whole set of benefits that green infrastructure can provide for these areas that currently don't have a mechanism. So could we in government create a mechanism? So that's one area, Victoria, is some of these new ways of pulling in funding. Another example is what I would call SUDS bonds, or sustainable urban drainage bonds. I mean, clearly there is a flood prevention market. People are interested in buying flood prevention ecosystem services, so insurers, and there's a way of packaging up bonds to be able to make them easy for insurers to buy, for water companies to buy, that also not only prevents flooding, but also provides green infrastructure. So part of it is just being very creative. What have you got? What can you do? And who are the buyers out there that would be interested, whether they're getting a benefit from a business improvement like flood prevention, or whether they're just making a donation because they want to do something good.
Great, thank you. And then final question, it'd be great if Chris and Sara, you could both give us your reflections on this. What do you think are the key skills that a city, whether that's a local authority or other partners within a sort of city context or a municipality, need within their team, and I'll use that rather than sort of specific employees, to be able to do this work? What are the critical skills and experiences to drive this work forward from your perspective?
Shall I start?
Yes, go for it. Thank you.
Okay. I won't go off on a really long list, but I think some of the key areas, some of the key areas for us. I mean, to give what's worked for us, we brought in someone to act as an investment officer, so someone who came in from our finance team directly into our environmental planning team to kind of guide this work and make sure that we're getting the numbers right and kind of taking that aspect forward was really key. Data mapping, that's a really other important aspect in terms of a skill set which you might not normally have directly in your team, so kind of bringing people in that respect. And obviously from a biodiversity and a game point of view, ecology, and having that kind of like background which may already be in place. I think beyond that, I think it's more a case of rather than necessarily having to have them directly, but making sure you've got strong links and ability to use others within local authority in legal, land and property, finance. There's a whole range of that big stakeholder map that I shared. And I think particularly if you're leading on this as well, you've got to have the right skills to speak to members, speak to the senior execs, in the organisation to join the dots, make this relevant to the wider sort of city strategy and the wider benefits, which we all know that our work delivers. But sort of making sure that narrative is strong and plays into that is really important.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I'd say you need to have people who are pretty creative at the kind of core centre. So they're flexible and they can work with shifting milestones, can be kind of thoughtful about who to bring along. I think making partnerships, finding the right people across council, making sure that you don't have enemies in a corner somewhere. The planning department don't like you because you're kind of cutting across their area. So it's very important that you've got all the right departments going in the same direction. First off, actually, you need the mayor or whoever is the lead to be enthusiastic. If you don't have the kind of central enthusiasm, it just isn't going to happen. So those would be the things for getting the project up and running and going. After that, actually, it's down to the kind of grassroots. Who's going to do the maintenance? Because for us, it's planting new trees and shrubs in maybe parks or gardens or trees or on roofs or whatever. Who's going to maintain this stuff? Are they going to do it enough? Because if the trees and so on die, they don't get the credits. So it's all a complete waste. So, it has to have a kind of practical element that works for the council.
Great. Thank you both. We're almost at time, but thank you all for your excellent questions. Thank you to the panel. I'm going to hand back to Matilda and Andrew to close us for this afternoon.
Great, thank you so much. It's lovely to see the thanks coming in the chat as well. So I'll thank the panel as well. Thank you so much, Victoria, Andrew, Sarah, and Chris. That was a really fascinating Q&A. It was great to see so much sort of interest in the work you're doing, and it's clearly a testament to how valuable it is. So if anyone has any other questions, please do get in contact with us directly via our website or by emailing us. We do also have a mailing list, so you can sign up to that via our website at the moment. We've come to the end of the webinar, so all that's left for me to do is to thank everyone for joining again. We really do appreciate it, and we look forward to connecting with you in the network in the future. Have a lovely rest of your day, everyone. Thank you. See you soon.